Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Well, recently on Business Matters, Quinn DuPont from UCD discussed Facebook's move into the cryptocurrency market. Since then, we've received lots of queries from listeners about both Libra and blockchain technology. So Quinn has returned to the Business Matters studio this morning to provide us with an insight into blockchain. Quinn, what is blockchain?
Technically speaking, what a blockchain is a little complicated because it can mean many different things, but sort of the purest incarnation would be a decentralized system of computers that bundle up transactions. So if I send you some money, for instance, that's a very kind of classic example, they get bundled up into what are called blocks. So these blocks of transactions. And then for security reasons, these blocks are then chained together using some sort of fancy cryptographic technologies. And what that means is that the whole blockchain is censorship resistant. So I can't prevent you from making a transaction with somebody else in the same way that the government can't prevent you from making a transaction with someone else. They're highly secure. They are append only, these blockchains. So that means every transaction that's ever been made is listed right there on the ledger itself.
And how does it work?
Typically speaking, you would have, as a consumer, you would have some sort of interface to it, like a wallet. That would be sort of the way that cryptocurrency works. But if you didn't have if it was more like, let's look at the supply chain example. So companies like IBM have invested a lot of money to track how foodstuffs transfer or go through the supply chain from the origin to the consumer. And in the same case, if that you'd have a wallet for cryptocurrency, you'd have a kind of interface for the blockchain itself.
What type of organizations are using blockchain today?
There's any number of organizations that are using blockchain. There's sort of organizations that are blockchain specific, startups that might have a use case. So to keep with the supply chain example, there's a company called Everledger. They track diamonds, for instance, on the blockchain, and they're very much just a small little startup. On the other hand, as I mentioned, you've got companies like IBM, very well established, large companies. They are also in the supply chain side of it, but also other parts of blockchain. So, and then you've got purely, kind of non-commercial, as it were, organizations. So for instance, there are many blockchain systems that are just open source software products, and so they're just comprised of peer-to-peer networks of people, and so you can still make money off of it. Usually through the mining process, which is a part of the validation of these transactions. So there is a business side to it, but it's not a sort of a formal organization.
I'm hearing that financial services and the legal sectors are going to be disrupted more than most when it comes to blockchain, but how so?
Yeah, financial services is probably the most developed industry at this point with respect to blockchain, and that's probably because the original blockchain, if you will, was, of course, Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency. And the relationship between Bitcoin and blockchain is nothing more than Bitcoin was a payment system that the sort of technical architecture underneath it was in fact a blockchain. And so because it was a payment system, it seemed very natural to everyone that, okay, this is a kind of a financial thing, right? And so very quickly, banks realized, well, we don't really care for Bitcoin, but what we do like the kind of technology underneath it, and therefore we can use this to transfer funds between banks and do all sorts of, many of the sort of financial services things using a blockchain because it's robust, it's secure, it's decentralized, and so on and so forth. So that was kind of one of the most well-developed use cases. Now, the legal services as well is something that's fairly well-developed. There's a number of possible options here. Everything from legal tech kind of cases. So this would be replacing notaries. So getting rid of, having to go to your notary and get something signed by an actual human. You could do this digitally, to faster processing of forms and contracts and all these sorts of things, as well as there's these things called smart contracts, which are a little bit of sort of automated code that lives on a blockchain that will get triggered and will do something when certain inputs are met. And this could, vastly change. These are sort of quasi-legal kind of contracts, and this could vastly change the legal terrain.
And how secure is blockchain?
This is one of those sort of questions as to, do you take it sort of in reality or in design? And so in design, blockchains tend to be quite secure. So, for instance, people will often point to the Bitcoin blockchain. This is the most developed blockchain. And they will say, correctly, that there's more or less, there's basically no true attacks that have been made on the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, that sounds kind of wild because, of course, everybody's heard about all the ways that people have lost money through scams and hacks and attacks and whatnot through, in fact, Bitcoin, but any other blockchain would be in the same kind of boat. And now what that means, why those are happening, is in fact largely in the broader ecosystem. So it's not sufficient just to have a blockchain or cryptocurrency by itself. You have to have all the ways it ties into the real world. And those places that it ties into the real world is where all the action happens. A major kind of point of risk is in what are called exchanges. And so this is, kind of like a money exchange. And so if you wanted to get some of these tokens that are required to use a blockchain, you have to go through an organization that will facilitate that. Well, you have to trust that organization, and many of them aren't very trustful. And so many people have lost money that way. And
how far are we away from blockchain being part of our daily lives?
There are a number of banks that have moved from proof of concept to actually running code for their financial services. As I said, the supply chain example is already in place. It's moved from proof of concept to being productized right now. There's a good number of things that are happening, but it's kind of like plumbing. It's the stuff you don't see and you don't really much think about. And I've long said, actually, that my guess where this is all going is probably into infrastructure, into plumbing. We won't see it. It'll happen. In many cases, these blockchain products, they won't even look like the original idea of a blockchain, right?
And for anyone listening to this morning's show that may be interested in developing a business around blockchain, what advice have you got for them in that respect?
I've had many people ask me, I've got a use case. What do you think? How should I approach it from a position of a blockchain? The first thing I'll say is that don't believe that blockchain is this wealth of money that it might that it sometimes gets seen as. We'll go back a year into sort of late 2017, I guess almost 2 years now, and we saw this mania where everyone thought, my business isn't going very well, so maybe I'll just sort of, blockchainify it or something. Even back then, that wasn't so easy, and it certainly isn't any easier today. So that's not a great reason to get into it. If the organization or the business case has to interact with outside parties in a very robust kind of way. So if it's just, if your company mostly just does internal transactions and that kind of thing, you probably don't need a blockchain. But if you're engaging other third parties and you have to do a lot of work with other, business-to-business type applications, these sorts of things, there might be a good use case there.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Quinn DuPont from UCD, and I would like to thank Quinn for sharing his insights into this revolutionary infrastructure with us this morning.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.